I have the pleasure of sharing a classroom with first graders. Displayed prominently on the wall, written in magic marker, on blue construction paper, in uncertain penmanship, is a brit, a covenant, an agreement the children and their teacher created at the beginning of the year to ensure harmony among the students. And here are some of their rules. Number 1, respect our bodies and those of other classmates. That translates as no poking, no pushing, no touching. What one student does to and with their body is not your business. Number 2, listen to teachers and friends when they speak. That was likely included to teach that when other kids have something to say, even if you don't like it or agree with it, you have to be polite and listen. Number 3, be kind. No child needs an explanation of kindness. They know when their classmate falls short, and according to this document, they are free to expect more from that child because it is part of the social contract. This is just a partial list, but it makes space for everyone in that room. I wonder if you are struck by how what matters to this small society are some of the very same things that adults are weighing as we consider leadership for our nation: bodily autonomy and appropriate boundaries, respect and civility, no bullying for starters. When kids have such clear ideas of what is and is not acceptable, it should prompt us to consider the same. What do we want for our society and our nation's future? What are we voting for anyway but the continuation of our democracy, a fact that was always assumed but never needed to be articulated until now? Because now, democracy itself is in danger. You see, our nation is not just a country, but an ideal founded on principles. When our founders broke away from British rule, from the arrogant oppression at the hands of a monarch, they made it possible for citizens to have a voice and for representation, for free and fair elections, for the peaceful transfer of power. As we draw close to this consequential election, the values written into our Declaration of Independence, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness remain guiding precepts we rely on for our own well-being, along with the expectation that freedom, justice, equality, and the rule of law will endure and safeguard a way of life that we cherish. And when necessary, should it ever be necessary, say, in the event of anti-Semitism or other hatreds, that those things will protect us in that fraught time. 248 years of crafting a nation has given rise to many beautiful visions of what our nation is capable of. President Ronald Reagan leaves as his legacy an image of a shining city on a hill. In his farewell address to the nation in 1989, he said, "I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, wind-swept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds, living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And that bears repeating. The doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. And we know that personally because ours is a nation of immigrants who came here for opportunity, for safety, to build better lives, and at the same time contribute to the nation we have today. Let's remember what our parents and grandparents have given to the strength and beauty of our country when we hear of the sweeping and, yes, terrifying boast that immigrants are liable to be deported en masse should democracy lose at the ballot box. President Reagan reflected further. We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise. And freedom is special and rare, he said. It's fragile. It needs protection. Perhaps President Reagan based his remarks on the wisdom of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who in 1941 introduced the ideals of the four freedoms: speech, religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear to our country, to encourage those who were war-weary, as well as nations abroad, that the principles Americans were fighting for were for a greater good. In this election, these principles, endorsed by presidents of both parties over the span of decades, are being challenged in ways that stand in stark opposition to the values of our democracy. Freedom of speech includes and champions the freedom to disagree without being targeted as an enemy. The threat of keeping an enemies list, going after political opponents, and incarcerating them for simply speaking their mind is in direct contrast to the cherished protection enshrined in the First Amendment. Even our first graders know that. Independence of the press falls under the same free speech umbrella. Journalists and media owe it to the public to report truthfully, without fear of reprisal, no matter what. That's more than their job, it's their right, privilege, and obligation, all rolled into one mitzvah. It's only recently that I understood the lesson that Professor Tim Snyder, historian of fascism and authoritarianism, teaches in his book on tyranny. Lesson number 1 reads, "Don't agree in advance." A fuller explanation of this? As society tilts away from democracy, don't make it easy for the regime that is trying to limit your rights by agreeing to their threats or demands before they even require it, thinking that such action on your part will benefit you in the future. Still, that always seemed more relevant to Eastern Europe than to us, until we heard that the Washington Post, whose motto was, democracy dies in darkness, refuse to endorse a candidate. Even a casual consumer of media understands that this stance is less about who is endorsed and more about the fear of anticipated reprisal. If you need more of an explanation, allow me to refer you to the enemies list previously cited. And closer to home, freedom of speech means that books will not be banned from our libraries or pulled from the school curriculum because a parent or a political party is uncomfortable with a topic, a lifestyle, or exploration of gender or sexuality. But we know, readers of every age, are transformed by exposure to worlds beyond themselves. And that is the blessing of literacy. While fighting a war against fascism and anti-Semitism, President Roosevelt lifted up freedom of worship, a right which isn't limited to the way one prays or the edifice which houses such gatherings. It includes the principles which inform and guide our lives, including the right to apply them. And since the Dobbs decision, you have heard many sermons from this pulpit about Jewish law and abortion and access to reproductive choice. Freedom of worship here translates into freedom to make decisions about one's own body, access to reproductive health care, which are permissible according to our faith. To be prevented from living those principles runs counter to the constitutional amendment that our government shall not impose or establish religious laws, known simply as the separation of church and state. And that aspect of democracy is on the ballot. And finally, FDR assured the nation of the right to have freedom from fear. Does it need to be said that fear-mongering has become an entire campaign genre? We have all heard the threats. A dictator on day one, enemies from within, turning the military against citizens, calling out Jews, Latinos, immigrants, among others, mass deportations. What image does that evoke for the Jewish listener? No one needs that spelled out. Remember the famous reflection written by Reverend Martin Niemöller during the Holocaust? First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I'm going to say aloud what many only hint at in the most oblique manner, that the rally in Madison Square Garden was a rehearsal of hate, that it was intended to invoke the same messages communicated at the rally held there in 1939, which was a tribute to invective and anti-Semitism. But this one expanded its scope to include other ethnicities who are also targets of hate. In an atmosphere of incivility, anger, and fraudulent claims, Let's not forget the accusation leveled weeks ago that Jews will be blamed for election results. Democracy is about deciding together, not fighting with each other. Democracy is about respectful engagement, not hate-filled vitriol. And democracy is worth standing up for. Think of all the beacons of liberty which lift up aspirational values, like Normandy standing for the hope of democracy world over, and Seneca Falls for the recognition of women and a woman's right to vote, Selma for equal rights, Stonewall for LGBTQ+ rights. These signal events demonstrate that as our country has grown, what it means to be a citizen continues to expand, along with the dignity it confers. Democracy does more than allow that, it requires it. This week's portion is named for Noah, a man who became famous for the ark and the flood and for his character. Noah is called an Ish Tzadik B'Dorotav, a righteous man in his generation. Countless commentators have spilled ink over whether his character would be regarded as laudable if he had lived in another time and place. But the point is this: in his generation, Noah stood up, and he was called righteous. In this moment, in this hour, think of yourself as a Noah. Voting for democracy means that we reject cruelty and bullying, autocratic leanings, misanthropy, and misogyny. It is an act of righteousness which may yet save an entire civilization as we know it. And if you are still unsure of what it means to vote for democracy, feel free to ask one of our first graders for advice. Shabbat Shalom. May this Sabbath bring peace.